Well, Europe's heat waves are no longer just threatening lives, they're threatening to shut down the power supply. Romania's military is blowing up rock formations in the Danube in an attempt to redirect more water towards the country's Cernavodă nuclear power plant. After months of drought and extreme heat, the river is running so low that one reactor has already been shut down. A second could follow.
The forces that we have mobilized here will work shoulder to shoulder to achieve this submerged threshold on the Bala arm, with the hope that by Tuesday we will have achieved this goal and have the expected effect: an increase in the level on the old Danube and further to the Cernavodă nuclear power plant.
In Hungary, the Danube has fallen to its lowest level on record, leaving the country's main nuclear power plant at Paks close to a complete shutdown. The plant normally provides almost half of Hungary's electricity, but without enough river water to cool its reactors, it is now producing only a fraction of its usual power. The government has asked factories and households to cut consumption, particularly during the evening peak. Electric freight trains are also being restricted to save power. Serbia is facing similar pressures as falling river levels reduce hydropower and nuclear generation, just as another heat wave pushes demand for air conditioning higher. And with little rain in the forecast, governments across Central and Eastern Europe are now trying to prevent a shortage from becoming a full-scale energy crisis. Well, I'm joined now by Chris Roslow. He's a senior energy analyst for Europe at Ember. That's an independent energy think tank. He uses electricity data and energy modeling to track Europe's transition from fossil fuels. And his latest analysis found that solar supplied a record quarter of the European Union's electricity in June. Chris, it's good to have you with us. Let me just ask you, how serious is the immediate risk of electricity shortages across Central and Eastern Europe?
I think so far this summer, it's obviously been an unprecedented summer for heat waves. The European system has held up relatively well. Obviously, we're now at the end of a very prolonged period of heat, and we're seeing an unprecedented situation in terms of the nuclear power reactors in Romania and Hungary being closed down. So I think, indeed, we are entering quite a serious moment in the summer after a long summer of extreme heat.
When nuclear and hydropower output fall simultaneously, how much flexibility does, I guess, the regional electricity system have to replace that lost generation?
I think the interconnectedness of Europe is one of its key strengths when it comes to energy. So that these links between countries are a really important source of resilience at all times of year, but especially at times of year like this, where we have certain power sources in certain regions experiencing trouble. I think it's worth saying it's not just nuclear and hydropower that kind of experience difficulty in extreme heat, but basically it's only, I think it's fair to say, only solar power performs relatively well in these conditions. And that for us just underlines the importance of having a diversified mix of energy sources.
Let me ask you about Hungary's Paks plant. I mean, it normally provides almost half of the country's electricity. How difficult is it to compensate when a source that important suddenly loses most of its output? I mean, can you count on other sources such as solar to compensate?
I think Hungary will be relying on imports more than usual with the absence of its nuclear power plant. Also, I've seen the government is taking a very sensible step to ask its power consumers to consume a bit less, especially over that tight evening period where we see the power market being typically the tightest at times like this. So yeah, it will have to draw on everything it can, including interconnection, and ramping up other sources to get through this period.
You know, this is happening. I mean, it's the beginning of August. We've still got quite a bit of summer left. This is happening during a heat wave when demand for air conditioning is rising. How much additional strain does that place on the grid?
So heat waves actually impact the grid, I would say, in three main ways. The first one, as you mentioned, is this higher than expected power demand from air conditioning and fans, etc. The second one is that grids themselves actually have thermal limits, and when the temperature is high, we get closer to those thermal limits, which can cause problems. And the third main one is that almost every source of power generation struggles in extreme temperatures, with the possible exception of solar, which performs relatively well. So yeah, the grid faces multiple challenges at times like this, for sure.
And governments are asking households and industry to reduce consumption. Are these precautionary measures, or are they a sign that the system is already close to its limits?
I think there are several signs that the system is close to its limits in parts of Europe. We see the main sign being high prices. We've seen extreme price spikes in the previous heat waves this summer, and we're seeing them again in this latest heat wave, especially in Central and Eastern Europe. So the signs are definitely there. I think the demand shifting is a big unknown, so it could definitely have a meaningful impact on the system. I think we're still in fairly early days of experimenting with just how much demand realistically can be shifted away from periods of peak consumption, but it would certainly help enormously to avoid even those extreme prices, and in the worst case, avoid a blackout.
Yeah, you mentioned that Hungary will be importing a lot more energy now. How important are cross-border electricity imports in preventing blackouts, and what happens when you've got several neighboring countries needing additional power all at the same time?
Well, luckily, in the case of Hungary, Hungary is one of the most interconnected countries in Europe relative to its own demand. But interconnections are a really important source of resilience for power systems. At all times of year, they've prevented more than one blackout in the past few years in Europe. You mentioned the issue of sometimes it's not as much help as it could be because neighboring countries may be experiencing similar effects, but at the kind of more regional scale, they're very, very important, because not every country is always impacted by extreme heat, exactly simultaneously. Also, the way that the weather systems work in Europe, it can be maybe windy, 100 kilometers away, but not windy in a certain country. So these interconnections, they help between neighboring countries. Also, they help at a regional level to balance the European system. So they're really vital, and we certainly need more of them.
What role could battery storage and other forms of flexible generation play during an emergency like we're seeing?
So I think there's a highly complementary set of technologies here. So I would say solar, air conditioning, and battery storage are a highly complementary trio of technologies, and these heat waves really highlight that. So during the day, of course, right now we're getting a lot of generation from solar and a lot of demand for air conditioning. So there's a very high overlap there in terms of that demand and that supply. The problems for power systems tend to come in the evenings, where the sun goes down, but the demand for cooling is still there. And this is exactly when more batteries on the system could come in, cover those few hours in the evening where the system gets really tight. We're not yet at the scale of battery storage in Europe where we're seeing that happen, but certainly that's the theory. And this battery investment is coming into Europe now at an increasing rate.
This crisis, Chris, does it expose an over-reliance on large nuclear and hydroelectric plants in parts of Central and Eastern Europe?
I wouldn't say it exposes an over-reliance on any single technology. As I was saying before, I think what it really underlines is the importance of having a diversified mix. And it reminds us again, and we already knew this, that the European system now needs more flexibility from different sources. So that could be battery storage, that could be more interconnection, that could be demand shifting, like we're seeing in the request for in Hungary. So I think the more flexibility for me is the main takeaway to ensure resilience in the future and for future heat waves.
All right, Chris Ruslow at Ember, good to have you on the program. Chris, we appreciate your analysis tonight. Thank you.